You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is your host, Koku. And today, we're going to have a discussion about the comedian Monique versus Netflix versus boycotting. Before I get into today's show, I want to give a free business shout out to Stephanie Renee's Salon, located at 1614 West Main Street in Kalamazoo, Michigan, zip code 49006. She can be reached at 269-459-6535. That's 269-459-6535. Once again, that's Stephanie Renee's Salon, conveniently located inside Cali Beauty. So please check her out, and thank you, Stephanie, for submitting your business for the free business shout out on our podcast. If you or someone you know who owns a black business who wants a shout out, have them email us at bitter.medicine.podcast@gmail.com so that we can get your information and we will shout you out on the next broadcast. While we're at it too, let's shout out KWAZ Radio. KWAZ Radio is doing big things, and they're currently looking for people who are opinionated on black empowerment and what we need to do in the black community to free ourselves from this oppression that we're under, and just to better ourselves generally. If you have a voice, have an opinion, and you want to express it, consider podcasting with the KWAZ Radio Podcast Network. You can contact them at kwaz.radio@gmail.com and pitch them your podcast show idea. Lastly, but not least, we want to shout out to the Pro Black Experience podcast with the host Onitase. That show has been doing good things and has been getting good feedback from its listeners. Please, by all means, support that show. Go over and subscribe. Just go to YouTube and search the Pro Black Perspective. It'll come up. Please subscribe. Please listen to the show. Please share it. And, the same thing that you do for us, please do for them. So, today's show. Unless you've been living under a rock on Mars, you should have heard by now that over this past weekend, the comedian and Academy Award winner Monique voiced her problem with Netflix, and she asked that the community stand with her and boycott Netflix because of a transaction that occurred. Netflix offered Monique $500,000, $500,000 for a comedy special. She couldn't understand why the number was so low, especially after, most people have known that Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock have commanded somewhere around $20 million. And the white girl, Amy Schumer, the talentless hack Amy Schumer, joke-stealing Amy Schumer, she got $11 million. Now, the interesting thing about Amy Schumer's $11 million, she got her $11 million. She did her Netflix special, if memory serves me correct, the leather special, I think it was called. I tried to watch it, complete garbage. I fell asleep. But then after she heard, and this is where white organization, also known as white privilege, comes in. And if you don't know what I'm referring to when I say that, listen to the Pro-Black Perspective's most recent podcast that breaks it down how white privilege is really just white organization. Take a listen to that. But when Amy Schumer learned, after having inked an $11 million deal for this stand-up special, when she learned what Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle were making, she went back to Netflix and said, hey, the disparity is kind of big here. And she was able to up-negotiate to $13 million. And that's going to be an important point for my take on the Monique situation. After Monique came out about it and appeared on a few shows like Sway in the Morning, and she also had a few posts on social media, Wanda Sykes, another black comedian, female comedian, she also revealed that Netflix had offered her less than half of what the entity offered to Monique. And she turned them down and she went elsewhere to Epix, I think. And I think she either did or is going to do a stand-up special at Epix. Interestingly enough, Wanda Sykes didn't go on a whole campaign concerning the disparity in pay. She just went elsewhere. And from the sound of it, she made better money. Okay? By the way, the reason why I'm just now speaking about this is because I wanted to take a few days to internalize it, to mull it over, to kind of hear what other people thought. If you're a part of the Bitter Medicine podcast page on Facebook and Twitter, you know that was one of our questions of the day recently. What did you think? Now, no one responded, and that's fine. But, we took our time with this one because we also didn't want to come at this from an emotional standpoint. And I'll explain later what I really mean by that, by not coming at it from an emotional standpoint. In fact, I'll say it now. I didn't want my blackness, a part of which is an emotional thing for me. I didn't want my emotions for the sister Monique to kind of make me, speak in anger against Netflix, because I took it as a race thing or a gender thing, which is what she's claiming that it is. I instead wanted to think it through from a business standpoint as well. So I still have my emotional feelings about it, but I also have a business feeling about it too. The business feeling that I have about it is, if I could sum it up into an analogy, I would say, realistically, at a hospital, do you pay the porter? Those folks who transport people around in the hospital beds. Does the hospital pay the porter the same that it pays the doctors? I mean, it would be ridiculous for a porter, and he could be the porter of the year. He or she could be the porter of the year, best employee. But are they going to realistically go to the hospital officials and say, hey, I should be making as much as your highest paid and best outcome doctors here? And you see how it's kind of ridiculous. So that's why I had to take a moment and look at it from a business perspective. I think one of the first problems Monique made is kind of comparing herself to Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock. And she made even a little bit of a mistake comparing herself to Amy Schumer, although I think Amy Schumer is talentless. But white society tends to have a corny humor anyway. And they tend to go with social media trends and this, that, and the other. If you think back a few years ago, Dane Cook, a white boy, was considered the funniest guy in America. And the reason why he was considered the funniest guy in America, or funniest person in America, was largely because he jumped on the social media thing real early. And he learned how he came to teach everyone else, in a sense, how content was king on social media, how interacting with the fans was the thing that you needed to always do. And that's how he had these large followings. So when he would have a show somewhere, he sold out. And eventually he was doing big stadiums and stuff like what you see Kevin Hart doing now. So a lot of comedians since him took that blueprint. In fact, there's a lot of Instagram funny people, I wouldn't even call them comedians really, who took that same concept to heart, and that's what a lot of people are doing now. Amy Schumer does something similar. She's a white woman, so she appeals to white women heavily. She has kind of that feminist vibe to her too, so that goes a long way for her. She's raunchy, definitely, so the guys will like her too. White guys like some of that shit too. So she has, for whatever reason, in addition to her whiteness, she has a following. And you gotta understand that too. So for her, Netflix would pay, and she would be able to negotiate a good sum of money. I don't think she's worth 11 million, much less 13 million. I don't think she's worth more than Monique if you go pound for pound, talent-wise. But the heat that she had, and still kind of has, is so high. This is why she could negotiate and even up-negotiate her pay. Then on the other hand, you have Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock. Now, Dave Chappelle, the thing about Chappelle is relevant again. There's some middle years there between the Chappelle show and Dave coming back in like 2010, I think it was, somewhere around there, where I don't know if Dave Chappelle would have commanded that much money. You know, $20 million for a stand-up special. I do believe, though, that he would have commanded a nice bit of money, because the way Dave Chappelle left the Chappelle show and the way people was kind of like left hanging, people anticipated Dave coming back heavily. So he could have probably demanded, in those middle years there, he probably could have demanded a pretty penny still. Again, I don't know if it would have been exactly what he's, capable of commanding from Netflix now. But Dave has come back relevant in the last 7 or so years by doing a lot of stand-up stuff. And, recently he just did Saturday Night Live. He had a Netflix special before, sometime early last year, that, was critically acclaimed, etc. And so for Monique, who as a comedian isn't as funny as Dave at all, ever, at least to me, and I'm sure to a lot of different people out there, she's okay. She'll get a chuckle from me here and there, but she's no Dave Chappelle, and she's not as relevant. She really has never been, even when she had the Parkers and even when she appeared in Precious, the horror story. She never really had the heat of a Dave Chappelle. She definitely never had the heat of a Chris Rock. So from a business standpoint, it's me taking the emotion out of it for our sister. It's problematic, the stance that she's taking, considering the names that she's calling. What that kind of equates to is the notion that a lot of people have, but there's a part of the notion that a lot of people omit, which is, equal pay for equal work is true, and it's the right thing to do, and it makes sense. But the thing that's often omitted or overlooked is, do you have equal impact or equal productivity? So yeah, Monique will be doing the same thing as the other three people she mentioned. But will you have the same impact or productivity from a business standpoint for Netflix? And I think that's something that's being lost here. I'm all for women receiving equal pay and being treated equally. I'm all for black folks receiving equal pay and being treated equally. But in this particular case, nothing against Monique personally, of course, does Monique really, like I said, when you talk about a porter, a transporter in the hospital, no matter how good they might be, no matter how decorated they might be, how much employee of the years they have, or what have you, are they going to command the same money as the top doctors in the hospital? No. So, on the flip side of the emotional side, why I took a little minute to podcast about this topic. Emotionally, as a black person within the system of white inferiority, as a middle-class gentleman, I didn't want to fall into the emotional trap of kind of reprimanding Monique for turning down $500,000 because most of us don't see $500,000. $500,000 for a lot of black folks and a lot of people in general is about 10 years worth of working a job, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 5-6 days a week, sometimes overtime, for about 10 years, and that's just before taxes. We're not even talking about when the taxes hit it. So emotionally, it'll be easy for a lot of people, especially black folks, to look at Monique like a clown and say, look, you're going to make $500,000. What are you talking about? That's $500,000 for an hour special. Consider, and like I said before, you're not on the level with Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle. You don't have the heat that Amy Schumer has going on for her right now. As far as the comedy game is concerned, a lot of people don't even remember or never even knew of Monique because she hasn't really been that relevant in comedy for some time now. So, again, I took my time to do this show because I didn't want to bring my poor man's perspective into it too much, although it is still valid to a certain extent. I'm going to play a clip for you guys later on where someone breaks down, what she could have done with that $500,000. Now, the issue of pay inequality or pay gaps are real. Again, unless you've been living under a rock on Mars, you are well familiar with the fact that there's a historical pay gap in America. And on the other side of the break, I'm going to run down the history of this pay gap, as well as I'm going to play the clips from Monique's original appeal. Okay, so stay tuned.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. On today's show, we've been discussing Monique's beef with Netflix and her asking for the community to stand with her and boycott Netflix. And I'm weighing in a few days later because I didn't want to get caught up in certain emotions. My pro-blackness. I didn't my belief in women's equality. I didn't want to get caught up in it from a poor man's perspective as well. For those of you who may have missed it, Monique, over the past weekend, complained about a lowball offer that Netflix gave her for a potential 1-hour stand-up comedy event. Let me play the original appeal by Monique that she had on social media.
Hey, my loves. I am asking that you stand with me and boycott Netflix for gender bias and color bias. I was offered a $500,000 deal last week to do a comedy special. However, Amy Schumer was offered $11 million, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle $20 million. Then Amy Schumer went back and renegotiated $2 more million because she said I shouldn't get what the men are getting, they're legends. However, I should get more, and Netflix agreed. When we asked Netflix to explain the difference, why the money was so different, they said, well, we believe that's what Monique will bring. We said, well, what about my resume? They said, we don't go off of resumes. Then we asked them, what was it about Amy Schumer? And they said, well, she sold out Madison Square Garden twice, and she had a big movie over the summer. Is that not Amy Schumer's resume? And then Netflix said, by the way, we believe Monique is a legend too. Why shouldn't I get what the legends are getting? Please stand with me in this boycott of Netflix. I love us for real.
And then a few days later, Monique had another social media message. Take a listen.
Hey, my loves. I just found out that my sister Wanda Sykes was offered $250,000 from Netflix to do a comedy special. I was offered $500,000. And our sister Amy Schumer, she was offered $13 million. Now some would ask, how is it that Wanda Sykes and Monique, together, these two black women who have 50 plus years in the comedy game, be offered $750,000 between the both of us, and Amy Schumer get $13 million? Now this has nothing to do or going against Amy Schumer. If our sister was able to get that, she was supposed to. But how is it that when it comes to these two black female comedians that are still at the top of their game after 50 plus years being in this business, be offered $750,000 collectively? Make that make sense.
So, to be fair here, Monique is, in that last clip, is doing some heavy-handed stuff. The 50 years in the game is combined. You haven't been around for 50 years doing comedy. Also, to say that both of you, Wanda Sykes and yourself, are still on top of your game, no. Let's keep it all the way real here. I can't tell you the last time I heard from Wanda Sykes. I think the last thing I've heard from Wanda Sykes, she was suffering from breast cancer. And before that, I think she came out as a lesbian. But, and again, I never found these two people particularly funny. In the comment section, I want you guys to rate Monique and Wanda Sykes from 1 to 10, 1 being the least, 10 being the most, funniest as you perceive it. I'm a little baffled by what Monique did in that second clip, because it doesn't really help your case, because it's, most people who look at it who have some sense will be able to break it apart, pick it apart. So I'm not sure why she would do something like that. To me, that kind of hurt her case a little bit. But when we talk about the gender gap in pay, what Monique is riffing off of really is something that's historically true. Until the 1960s in America, job listings were posted in newspapers separately for men and women. Sometimes the identical job was posted under Seeking Men and under Seeking Women. Let me say that again. Jobs until the 1960s were listed separately for men and women. And sometimes the same job listing was listed for men, and then it was listed again for women, but with different pay. In the mid-60s, they had what was called the Equal Pay Act that made it illegal to pay women lower rates based on sex alone. Of course, that never was really enforced, and of course, companies will find a way around it. But today, in recent years, women earn white women earn about 80 cents for every male dollar, white male dollar. Now, as you've heard us say on this show before, and as you should know in your own experience, whatever is going on in white society, especially if it's bad, is going on twice as bad in black society. If white folks are having a hard time getting work, then black folks are having twice as difficult time in getting work. Just using that as an example. In black society, black men and women, of course, make less than white ones. Definitely white men. And between black men and black women make about 88 cents to every black man's dollar. So there is a gap. The gap isn't as wide as it is in white society. Some people have attributed the gap in pay to the fact that older women are being factored into how wages are being calculated. And those older women tend to work in those fields where there's a lot of old-time attitudes and conditions and thinking towards those positions. Think like secretaries and stuff like that, right? So all those older women, they're in those secretary jobs, because that's what was popping for them when they were younger women. And they've kind of, did their years, stayed on a job, retired from that job. And a lot of those jobs, I can tell you, if you don't already know, i.e. secretaries, in most places aren't making no big set of money. I work at an academic institution. I could tell you secretaries often are damn near in poverty. Many of them will tell you if it wasn't for them having a family, having a husband and stuff like that who was earning some money, and they were combining their dollars together and stuff like that, they wouldn't be able to survive. One of the things that supports this notion that it's because of the older women who are being calculated into the wages thing. One of the things that supports this notion is back in 2010, they found that women who were under the age of 25, who were working full time, they earned about 95% of men's salaries, versus older women who were like between the ages of 55 and 64, who were making 75% of men's salaries, right? So young, and of course these numbers are about white folks, really. These numbers never take into consideration first and foremost ever black folks. So these are really like a white statistic, right? But they found that those women under 25 were making about 95%. There was still a gap, but the gap is much smaller. In fact, in science, if there's a difference of 5%, you call that a negligible difference. So it's essentially the same, scientifically speaking, right? Versus these older women who probably had jobs like secretaries and stuff like that, they were making 75% of what their male counterparts were making. Now, it could be noted that the reason why women under 25 were making just about the same as their counterpart, their male counterpart, it could be because that the reason why it's basically the same is because those entry-level jobs, someone who's under 25 most times is taking an entry-level job. And those entry-level jobs are all low in pay. And so everyone, man and woman, they make about the same amount of money. But as time goes on, the pay doesn't reflect the changes. It doesn't reflect the experience that's been accrued, or the knowledge that's been obtained, the education, etc. So it still seems like there could be there's just something that I guess they want to use the term patriarchy, that is just patriarchy that just pushes men, pushes their wages up above women. So I just have to note that too. That could be, and that's what's cited as one of the reasons why, you could kind of counter that previous point that women under 25 make about the same money. In fact, if you go back in your memory to 2009, Obama actually pushed some legislation so that there was equal pay and this, that, and the other for women and stuff like that. So it's been a problem historically. So Monique isn't just pulling this, completely out of her ass here, that there's some discrimination when it comes to pay between men and women. And when Monique was on Sway's morning show, she said something. Now, I don't know if Monique really stands on this, or if she was using this as a part of getting the compassionate vote or the compassionate follower, so to speak. But she mentioned that if she took the 500,000 for the one Netflix special, what would you do? What would that do for, say, a Tiffany Haddish? And I would wager to say that I think that's a little bit disingenuous on Monique's part. I don't think she's really doing it for a Tiffany Haddish, right? I think she's saying that because it sounds good to say and it makes people nod their head in agreement and kind of give her some support. This is just my conjecture. She might be absolutely serious about what she's saying. But I think it's a good... I mean, in business, it's what you do. You know, men do it when they're courting women because that's business too. You know, you throw in a line there to get that compassion, to get that pity, to force the other person's hand a little bit to choose you. And I think Monique is doing a little bit of that there. The thing about Tiffany Haddish, if she's put in a situation where she's offered a deal by Netflix, I don't think they will lowball Tiffany Haddish because Tiffany Haddish has that heat behind her right now. And she's genuinely funnier than Amy Schumer. Now, Tiffany Haddish doesn't have as many years in the comedy game, so she can't command the money that Chappelle and Chris Rock can. But I'm pretty certain she would be able to command what Amy Schumer got, and probably even a little bit more. And if she couldn't, if Netflix came at her with the bullshit, then I would absolutely cancel my subscription to Netflix and have nothing to do with the company. Because that would tell me, because Tiffany Haddish will have checked off everything off the list. A hot movie the previous summer, she has the name recognition, she has the heat behind her. I'm sure Haddish can sell out a venue at this point. You know, so if they came at Haddish and didn't hit her up with 13 mil or probably more, 15, 16, 17 mil, then I would definitely boycott in that manner. But the real issue that I have with the situation is, Monique is putting it out there that she's the most decorated comedian alive. And she's basing that off of having won an Academy Award for the 2009 movie called Precious, where she played an abusive mother. Gabrielle Sidibe was the daughter in that film, and that's what kind of put her on the map. And that gay guy, Lee Daniels, was I think he was the director. I think he may have even written that movie too. And ever since that time, 2009, when Monique starred in that horror film called Precious, she's claimed that she's been whiteballed ever since then. She claimed she was whiteballed because she refused to play the game, the Hollywood game where you got to thank everyone and you got to do the press junket and stuff like that. But even in what Monique said about that, Monique wouldn't do any of it for free. Now, I don't know if it's the case that other folks in her position are always paid to do those things. I couldn't tell you, but I know that she put it out there front and center. she did not play those games. You know, she didn't play along with Hollywood and do all the promotional stuff because she wasn't going to do it for free. And I can't fight her for it. She knows her worth. But I do ask Monique, in all things, be true. Be true to yourself and be true to the situation. If it's the case that people tend to do those things and they don't get paid, or they don't get paid all the time, or what have you, or they do it because they're trying to build that heat around that project to propel them to something bigger, sometimes you need to do stuff like that. In fact, I was listening or watching, actually. I was watching the 5150 show with Corey Holcomb. And I love the 5150 show, actually. I have some issues with all the use of the N-word and stuff like that, but that's just how these folks talk. I'm not condoning it. I never will. But I give them props for tackling certain issues and being frank and outspoken about certain things that a lot of people who are on the fringes of Hollywood, who are trying to make it big, a lot of people wouldn't talk about and say it in the way that they say stuff. And I appreciate Corey Holcomb for that. By the way, Corey Holcomb, way funnier than Monique. Way, way funnier than Monique. And I think if Netflix came to Corey Holcomb and offered him $500K to do a 1-hour stand-up special, I'm pretty certain he'll take it. Pretty sure he'll take it. And when I was listening to the show recently, Corey Holcomb has a brother on there named Zoe Williams. Zoe Williams hosts several shows on an independent radio station. One of them is called The Voice of Reason. I can't remember the name of the other show. I'm not even sure if he still does the other show, but I know The Voice of Reason was a show I used to keep up with for some years there. And Zoe Williams spoke on the Monique situation and the $500K. And here's what Zoe said. And I felt this way too. But like I said earlier, I wanted to take a moment before I said anything on this whole situation because I didn't want to speak on it emotionally from a poor man's stance when I hear the number $500K. But what Zoe is about to say makes sense on a business level. Take a listen.
Well, look at it like this. $500,000 is a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in the African-American community. We make up 2.6% of the nation's wealth, right? Mm-hmm. 2% of that is in the hands of baby boomers. The other 0.6% is everybody else. Oprah, Jay-Z, mm-hmm. everybody. Mm-hmm. Take that $500,000. Right. Do a motherfucking, Netflix
right?
show,
and you'll get another one.
And then make yourself relevant again. Because this is a question of heat. Right. This is a question of heat. You not hot. Get hot. Take this $500,000, blow yourself back up, and now you got momentum. But
just
based
get
off
of
of who you were,
for Zoe, she blackballed.
What you said was so profound. But check this out. These motherfuckers know they not finna blow themselves back up.
Nah. And there you have Zoe Williams' take on it. And I took my time to talk about this topic, but it's true. I do agree. Take out the fact that, I don't have $500,000. I'm not getting it for an hour's work. But if you're Monique, take the $500K, do a great special, the best you've ever done, get your heat up, and then you could come back to them or whoever else and start and demand more. I mean, 500 is nothing to poo-poo about. It's nothing to spit on. It is what it is. As Netflix showed you, the other names you're bringing up have heat behind them. 2 of the 3 names are legends in comedy, period. And they're relevant today and they have huge heat behind them. And so, take the 500,000. Don't make no big complaint. Or you know what? Don't take the 500,000 and do what Wanda Sykes did and go over to Epix and negotiate a better deal over there then. You know, but to turn to the community, and I know she's mostly addressing the black community, and ask them to boycott because you got offered a sum of money the majority would never see, that's a tough one for me to swallow. That's a tough deal for me to swallow. I get it, because I do believe that black folks especially needs to show a Netflix or anyone, any entity, that we are important as well, and that our dollars make you guys blow up too. It reminds me, I was listening to Colin Cowherd on, I think he's on FS1, Fox Sports 1. I think he has a show that comes on right after Skip Bayless and our brother Shannon Sharp. And around the time when there was all that talk about Colin Kaepernick not getting a job, and the black community was talking about let's boycott the NFL and stuff like that, which I've still maintained all season. Colin Cowherd said something like, you know what, the people who will boycott, they don't matter. And I looked at this white asshole like, the fuck you mean we don't matter? And he tried to insinuate that the people who would boycott are the ones who are not pumping money into the NFL. You know how much black folks spend on jerseys and caps and all this shit? That's NFL merchandise? That's sports merchandise in general? Do you know how much black folks watch your football on Sunday? And this white jackass is going to sit up there and talk about they don't matter. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. Right? Black folks might not be able to readily afford going into your stadium and watching your shows and buying your overpriced popcorn that's most times stale any goddamn way. Right? But when you talk about those TV ratings that get your Nielsen ratings up, that allow you to go and demand a certain amount of money minimum from your advertisers, black folks are heavily involved in that. So don't ever say they don't matter. And so I stand with Monique on that level of we need to show any entity that wants to downplay our significance, we need to show them our economic might and just how it would be if we pulled out of making you rich, right? But again, all that's being said, I think Monique should have either accepted it, done a good job, and be able to demand higher numbers later, or decline it quietly and go elsewhere, right? But I also have a few problems with Netflix too. Here's my issue. One of the things about Netflix is Netflix doesn't tell you its viewership numbers. So, as a viewer, as one of the people like me out here who's hearing this story and hearing about how much millions Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, and the hack, unfunny Amy Schumer, white girl is making, we don't know, say, for example, Amy Schumer. We don't know if the viewership numbers from her leather special, for example, we don't know if the viewership numbers justify the $13 million reward that she was given. That's a big problem for me. Netflix could just be out here giving white folks opportunities to make money. Now, Dave Chappelle and them, I'm sure their viewership will justify how much they make. I'm certain of their viewership. But Amy Schumer, I'm not really certain how much people are really going to watch. Like I said, I tried to watch it at least once, maybe even twice, and fell asleep. In fact, I fell asleep the first time. The second time I watched a certain point, I was just like, I can't do this. I just can't. And what's so crazy about Amy Schumer? It's well documented now, and it's known she's a joke stealer. Amy Schumer's a joke stealer. She's stealing jokes from some of the best, living and dead. Patrice O'Neill, for example. She's stolen jokes from him. And she's still not funny. That tells you just how talentless she is. I think she's one of these people, if I'm being very honest, I think a lot of white guys especially look at her and they hear some of the slut shit she's talking and they think about fucking her. I'm going to keep it real honest with y'all today. I think she has that kind of slutty thing about her, which white guys tend to like slutty women. And I think that's what gets her off. She has a little feminist type of I'm woman, hear me raw type shit. This is why she talks a lot of that kind of slutty shit. And I think a lot of the white girls like it too because they live it. And who doesn't live it? They want to live it. They like that kind of thing. And I think that's where she kind of gets her thing from. But I don't know that her viewership numbers really support that price tag that she initially negotiated and then the upgrade that she negotiated after hearing what the black men were making. And by the way, that's a long time little game white women play too. Feminism and all this shit was created out of white women seeing black men making strides above them. And so they started to complain to their white men about how they were being treated compared to the lowly Negro black male. So what Amy did there has some historical significance as well. That's what they do. All she did there was go back to Netflix and say, no, man, how can you treat these Negroes so much better than me? And the only reason I'm sure she didn't demand, and she might have even demanded this behind the scene, to be paid equally with them is because you just couldn't justify it, Netflix. Netflix just would not be able to justify that. And on a business level, that could hurt them when they see this no-talented hack. When we see how this no-talented hack was supposed to be paid $11 million and she negotiated herself all the way up to $20 million to be in the runnings with Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock and stuff, they couldn't swing that. You can't spin that. You can't do anything with it. So what Amy Schumer did there that Monique is talking about, it's an old historical game white women have been playing for a long time. My other issue with Netflix in this scenario, I've talked about my issues with Monique, but my other issue with Netflix is in the point that it seems to me Netflix took a stance like they were going to offer big dollars to some people, negotiate higher if necessary, but for others, it was just non-negotiable, take it or leave it. That is where I have huge problems with Netflix. Because on a business level, you might bid low. That's how business run. You'll bid low. You say, hey, Monique, man, take this $500,000, do a little special. You would do it. And if you could get away with it, you'll get away with it. But when Monique calls you on it and points out to you, how can this be? Given that, my resume versus the resume that you're saying Amy Schumer has. How can this be such a disparity? Well, and then Netflix turns around and says, well, take it or leave it. I have a problem with that, especially as I mentioned before, Amy Schumer was making $11 million, did the special, heard what Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock were making, and went back and renegotiated up $2 more million. So you worked with the white woman, but the black woman that was like some take it or leave it shit, that I have a huge issue with Netflix for. And those are really my two big issues with Netflix. We don't know if the viewership numbers correspond with the paycheck that Amy Schumer received. And you were willing, Netflix, to work with Amy Schumer and give her a $2 million increase. And with Monique, you wouldn't budge off of $500,000. I'm going to pause here for a quick station ID, and then I'll give you my last thought on what we really should do in terms of this situation.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. You know, we spent the last near hour discussing the Monique versus Netflix situation that recently occurred, where Netflix offered Monique $500,000 for a comedy special, usually an hour-long special. And the disparity between what Monique was offered and what Dave Chappelle was able to earn, $20 million, Chris Rock reported $20 million, and the white, unfunny, talentless hack Amy Schumer, who was able to get $11 million initially. But when she heard what Dave and Chris were making, she went back to the table and she was actually able to come out of it with $13 million. Versus Monique, who's making who was offered $500,000. And also Wanda Sykes, who Netflix offered less than half of what Monique was offered. I talked about my issues with it from both sides, from a business standpoint, taking it even emotionally as well. I talked about the historic case that Monique is touching on, that there historically has been a pay gap when it comes to gender. And in the last segment, I talked about my two main issues with Netflix in the situation. The two issues that I have is that Netflix kind of hit Monique with a take it or leave it type thing, whereas with Amy Schumer before her, Amy was able to renegotiate from $11 million to $13 million. And I also take issue with Netflix in that Netflix notoriously doesn't share its viewership numbers. So you can't even say if Amy Schumer's viewership justified the $11 million she was initially given, much less the $13 million she was able to upgrade the paycheck to. And then before we did the station bump, I foreshadowed that I was going to talk about what I think we should do. Monique is asking that the community, and I'm sure she's talking largely to the black community, she's asking that we stand with her, which I do, and boycott Netflix. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think boycotting Netflix is the answer. I do believe black folks should take a stand and show these entities that we are relevant, our dollars do matter, and you can't just shit on our people while you boost up white people. Right? I will say that. But I think there's something better we could do than boycotting Netflix, actually. I did a search on Netflix for Monique. And I found there was 3 entries on Netflix for Monique. One of them is called All-Star Comedy Jam. That's that Shaq All-Star Weekend comedy thing, which if you keep up with that, you'll know that Corey Holcomb, who I mentioned earlier, one of the funniest comedians out there, who by the way, Monique is not as funny as. He was on there one year and he killed it. And a few other black comedians who are known, they haven't really blown up, but to cross over, so to speak. But she did that. I don't really remember her set because I've seen all of them, I believe. I don't remember her set, which speaks a lot about how funny she is, to me at least. But she was on that, and you could go on Netflix and watch it. She had her stand-up special that she did several years ago. I think it's called I Could Have Been Your Cellmate. That's where she did a stand-up in a woman's prison. And I remember watching it, but again, I don't remember any real funny joke. It just wasn't memorable for me. It's like if Eddie Murphy, it's like Eddie Murphy Raw or Delirious. You remember jokes from that, man. There's things you could sit down right now and you could just laugh your ass off about it. They're just so memorable. And by the way, if Eddie Murphy was to be offered a deal by Netflix, I'm sure it'll even be more than what Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock earned or are going to earn in the case of Chris Rock. And the reason why it'll be that high is because of the anticipation. See, there's heat and there's anticipation as well. And a guy like Eddie Murphy, people have been begging for him to come back to stand up for years now. So as soon as that hypothetical would be announced, Eddie Murphy's come out to do a Netflix special, I expect him to get $30 million. Because it's that big of an event. But Monique doing an hour-long special is not that big of an event. There's no heat behind it. There's no anticipation. No one's out here really saying, begging for Monique to do stand-up. But anyway, back to what I found on Netflix when I did a search for Monique. Again, All-Star Comedy Jam. I Could Have Been Your Cellmate. Her stand-up special she did several years ago in a woman's prison. And there's another entry called Blackbird. I never heard of it, but apparently it's something to do with some queer black kid and his understanding mom. I assume she's the mom because, let's face it, folks who are like Monique, who have that look and stuff like that, they're usually treated like a mommy in film, depicted as a mommy. So anyway, there's 3 entries on Netflix for Monique. Instead of boycotting Netflix, which, let's be real, most Negroes wasn't boycotting Netflix over Monique anyway. For a 1-hour special that they probably weren't going to watch anyway. Okay? But what I think we can do instead of boycotting that, I think you can do what I did search Monique on Netflix, thumbs up the 3 entries that she has, especially the 2 comedy ones that she has on Netflix. Watch them again, play them when you go into bed and not going to be watching a damn thing, and get the numbers for those shows, for those entries, up. And I'm not even ashamed to tell you. Meanwhile, go to Amy Schumer shit and thumbs down that shit. Okay? That's what I think is a better tactic to take on. Watch the funny shit that Monique did and try to show Netflix that, yo, there's an uptick in her viewership on our platform. The likes are high. Go on your social media and talk about how you just watched those 2 Monique comedy entries on Netflix. Tag Netflix, hashtag it. And I think that, as well as, like I said, thumbs down, and don't watch Amy Schumer shit, but thumbs down it anyway, right? I think that is a better tactic, and I think that's more in line with what the average black person would have done anyway. Like I said, the average black person is not going to stop watching Netflix because Monique is trying to make $11, $12, $13 million for a comedy special that most black folks probably would not have watched anyway, if we're being real honest. Most black folks weren't anticipating. They're not hot and bothered for a Monique comedy special. You know, to say anything different would be fictitious. So the better deal, folks, instead of boycotting Netflix, go get those numbers and those ratings for those 2 comedy specials, especially for Monique. Go get those numbers up. And if you can, go thumbs down Amy Schumer's bullshit that she put out there. And I think that is the way to go. I want to thank you all for listening to today's show. I know I owe you a few shows because, like I promised, I was going to do 2 shows a week. Sometimes it's not always feasible, but I'm going to be dedicated to this. I'm going to make sure catch up with 2 shows for you. So look out for those. I want to give a shout out to the Bitter Medicine podcast Think Tank on WhatsApp. I give thanks to all the guys men and women who are in there who contribute and who contribute on a regular basis. And if you want to contribute, if you want to be a part of something like that, head to our Facebook page and you could find the clickable link. Do it on your mobile phone so that when you click the link, it takes you right to the group, and join today. Also, I want to thank those people who have donated to our GoFundMe. We have a GoFundMe account. Look us up on GoFundMe. We're asking for donations, maximum $2,000 by between now and June, to be able to upgrade our podcasting equipment, as well as to be able to put money out there to market the podcast more, to make it more visible in the black community, and for whoever else wants to partake and listen to what we're doing. If you can do that, just for the price of a cup of coffee, if you could donate that to us, it'll go a long way in helping us to get this message going. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, as well as to the KWAZ radio channel on YouTube. And once again, thank you all for listening. Oh, and one other thing I have to say. Dear black folks, and I think this is appropriate for this conversation, but dear black folks, please learn how to do business. One of the things with the Monique problem that I didn't talk about all show, and I'm going to talk about business, doing business in a future podcast for black people, but we have to learn to be more business savvy. As a podcaster who tries to have people on the show, I've had several people now who were supposed to appear who didn't. I emailed them. They don't respond, but I see them all over social media, active all the time. My thing is, man, do business on a business level, right? Be astute. If you change your mind and you don't want to be on the show anymore, just let me know. If you need more time before you appear, just let me know. But to leave me hanging after I've planned to interview you, have you on the show, and then it's crickets, that's really not how you do business. And I noticed that a lot of black folks do that type of shit when they're dealing with other black folks. That has to stop. And I'm going to talk about that more in a future podcast. Until next time, though, once again, thank you for listening to the show. Please share the show on your social media. Please subscribe to our pages on social media. And until next time, this has been the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.